My name is Mara, and I never expected to be starting over at 39. I always imagined this part of life would be steadier somehow, married, a home filled with laughter, maybe a dog or two. Instead, I found myself on a Thursday morning, standing in the kitchen of a house that didn't feel like mine anymore, looking at the last coffee cup he left behind. Logan. We were together for 6 years. It was quiet, comfortable, full of little rituals that made the days soft and golden. We had our Sunday pancake mornings, walks by the river at dusk, and quiet evenings curled on the couch watching nature documentaries. Logan always wore mismatched socks and hummed old jazz tunes while he cooked. I used to watch him slice vegetables like it was a kind of sacred ritual, and he'd always look up and smile at me like he knew exactly what I was thinking. There was a time, early in our relationship, when we got caught in a thunderstorm during a camping trip. We ran laughing through the woods, soaked to the bone, and ended up huddled under the tarp with a bottle of wine and a deck of cards. It was one of the happiest nights of my life. We didn't need much back then. Just each other. But things fray slowly sometimes. The changes are so quiet, you almost miss them. The silence that lingers a little longer after a disagreement. The way he started sleeping on the edge of the bed. The way we stopped asking each other about our days. I kept hoping we were just in a rough patch. That he was stressed. That we'd find our way back. We used to dream together about buying land, building a little cabin somewhere. Growing tomatoes and lavender in the backyard. We talked about adopting an older dog from the shelter. We never made it that far. For the last few months, he has been staying late at work. Or so he said. He started forgetting things, little things, like what we had for dinner the night before, or that I hated the taste of cilantro. But it was the emotional forgetting that hurt more. Forgetting how to touch me gently. How to ask me if I was okay. Then, one morning, he stood in the kitchen, pouring his coffee with his back to me, and said it.
I think I've been gone for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it.
I stood frozen, my breath shallow and cold. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The silence that had stretched between us for months suddenly became a wall I couldn't climb. And just like that, I was alone again. That morning, he left. A duffel bag slung over his shoulder, keys in hand, he kissed me on the forehead like I was a stranger he once loved. I stood in the doorway long after the sound of his car faded. The cup. His favorite blue enamel mug with a chip near the rim, was still sitting in the sink when I finally walked into the kitchen. The coffee had gone cold. I stared at it for a long time, and then I started to cry. Not loud or dramatic, just this slow leaking from the eyes, like my body finally realized what my mind had been too afraid to admit. He was really gone. And I didn't know how to live without him yet. For weeks, I didn't know what to do with myself. The house felt like an echo of something that used to be full. I spent a lot of time on the couch, staring at old photos I hadn't taken down yet. The bed felt too big. I stopped cooking. Days blurred. And sadness, that slow, creeping sadness, settled deep into my bones like it planned to stay. One afternoon, after a string of gray days and a sudden burst of sunlight, I looked out the window and saw the river trail. We live near the Appalachian foothills, and there's a trail that winds along the bank, ending at an overlook where you can see for miles. I used to hike it with Logan. But I hadn't gone there since he left. But something about that day pulled me toward it. I grabbed a jacket, some snacks, and filled a thermos with tea. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, peace, maybe? Or just somewhere to be other than in my own head. The trail was muddy and quiet. Moss clung to the rocks, and tree roots snaked across the path like old veins. My boots squelched with each step, but I kept going. Somewhere between the first switchback and the old fallen log, I started crying. I didn't even notice until my breath caught hard in my chest. I sat on a rock and let it all come out, the weight of everything I had been holding in. The grief. The confusion. The shame. What could I have done differently? Did I love too much? Not enough? I thought I had built a life with someone who wanted to build one with me. Then it started drizzling, soft and cold. I pulled up my hood, wiped my face, and kept walking. At the overlook, the valley was shrouded in mist. The river snaked below like a silver ribbon, winding into the distance. I stood there for a long time, sipping my tea and letting the cold sink into me. And slowly, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a while. Alive. Not better. Not healed. But real. Present. Like maybe I was still here. Like maybe this brokenness wasn't the end of me. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room with a notebook and wrote one sentence. Go west. Find the ocean. I didn't know why I wrote it. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. I'd only seen the Pacific once years ago, on a college trip to Oregon. But suddenly, I couldn't stop thinking about it, the wild waves, the rocky shorelines, the way the sky felt bigger there. So I packed a bag. I left a note on the fridge for my sister, who'd been checking on me weekly, and I got in my car. I drove through 5 states in 2 days, sleeping in roadside motels and gas station parking lots. I ate crackers and gas station coffee, listening to sad playlists and podcast interviews about grief and change and the bravery of starting over. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a movie who had no plan. But I kept driving. When I crossed into Oregon, the sky turned gray. Rain fell in streaks across the windshield. But when I finally pulled into the little beach town I had Googled halfway across the country, the clouds parted for a moment. And I saw it. The ocean. My breath caught. Something in me, something old and aching, softened. I found a rental cabin by the coast, cheap, quiet, and a little worn down. The blue paint peeled in long strips, and the porch swing squeaked whenever the wind moved through. But it was perfect. Exactly what I needed. I unpacked my bag slowly, like I had nowhere else to be. Then I made a pot of tea and sat by the window. For the first time in over a month, I didn't feel like hiding. Not entirely. That night, I walked the beach. The tide was rolling in, the waves crashing against the shore with a kind of fury that echoed in my chest. It was wild, loud, unapologetic, and oddly, I loved it. The sound, the salt in the air, the way the cold stung my cheeks, it all made me feel awake. Somewhere along the waterline, I found a smooth black stone. I picked it up without thinking, held it in my palm like a secret I wasn't ready to share. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made coffee and wrapped myself in an old quilt I found in the closet. Then I stepped out onto the porch. The fog clung low, blanketing everything in softness. I couldn't see the water, but I could hear it. Gulls cried somewhere out in the mist. And I just sat there, watching the light shift slowly over the sand. And then, without meaning to, I whispered out loud, "You made it." The days passed gently after that. I hiked quiet trails along the cliffs, wind in my hair and the sea always just in view. I spent long hours in tiny cafes, journaling with a pen that felt like an extension of my hand. I bought sea glass earrings from local artists who smiled like they knew something about healing. I still cried. I still missed him. Some days the grief sat heavy, and I let it. But little by little, it stopped being everything. The sadness wasn't the only thing I felt anymore. And that was something. One night, I built a fire on the beach. I wrapped myself in my coat and watched the flames flicker against the waves. I thought about how I used to believe love was something that made you whole. Now, I was beginning to believe that maybe love is something you carry, even after it's gone. That maybe being whole isn't about never being broken, but about choosing to live open-hearted anyway. A few days later, I met a woman named Claire. She owned a tiny bookstore off the main road and wore mismatched socks and smelled like rosemary. We talked for 2 hours about poetry, grief, and healing. She told me she'd been divorced for 10 years. That it had wrecked her. That she'd moved here to start over. This place saved me, she said. I told her I hoped it might save me, too. We started having coffee every morning. We sat on the sand and watched the waves, and the dogs run wild. I started laughing again. I started reading again. I started remembering who I was before I was his. It's been 3 weeks now. I don't know what happens next. I'm not ready to go back home. I think I'm going to stay here a while. Maybe get a part-time job at the cafe. I don't need everything figured out yet. What I do know is this: life will hurt sometimes. People will leave. Hearts will break. But there will also be mornings filled with fog and coffee. Strangers who feel like old friends. Oceans that remind you to breathe. And sunsets are so beautiful, they crack you open in the best way. Maybe that's the point. Not to outrun the pain, but to walk through it, one step at a time, until your feet find solid ground again. Until one day, you look out at the horizon and realize you're not lost, but really, you were just stepping into the next part of your story. It was almost a year later, early spring again, when I got the call. His sister's voice was quiet, trembling. "I'm sorry," she said. "Logan passed a few days ago." I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the phone with both hands. I hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in months. "He didn't want anyone to know," she continued. "Stage 4. He found out too late. Said he couldn't bear for you to watch him fade." There was a pause. "But he left this. For you." A small package arrived a week later. Inside was a letter in Logan's handwriting, shaky, but still his. In it, he told me how much he loved me. How every goodbye had broken him, but he wanted my memories of him to be whole. Wanted my life to be untouched by hospital beds and slow goodbyes. I read it once. Then again. And again. The next morning, I walked the river trail with the sun warm on my face, the thermos in my hand. At the overlook, I sat and listened to the wind in the trees, tears sliding down my cheeks. He had left, but not for lack of love. He left because of it. Because he loved me so much.